Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Trey Songz, titled Trigga. So okay, in the past I might have mentioned that after Chris Brown's assault on Rihanna in 2009 and his justifiable career slump, there was a rush by the music industry to find the next big Usher wannabe and push them into the spotlight. And in 2009-2010, we got a whole slew of acts getting major promotion in this area. Acts like Tayo Cruz, Jeremiah, Ayaz, and two of them that I've actually talked about before. Jay Sean and Jason Derulo, the latter of which who actually managed to stick around and somehow get worse. And among that group was Trey Songz. Although he'd been in the industry a little bit longer than most of his contemporaries and drew a lot more of his inspiration from one of the more influential figures in modern R&B of the time, R. Kelly, who was at the time coming off of a string of mostly forgettable albums and one unforgettable video series. Now, this isn't the first time that R. Kelly has spawned artists who are trying to mimic his style and personality. Acts like Genuine and B2K, who you probably all likely forgot existed from the early 2000s, they fall into this vein. But Trey Songz actually managed to stick around even as R. Kelly moved back into old school R&B and soul, and Chris Brown's career bounded up from a resurgence to one of the worst albums of 2012. Going back to Trey Songz, I'm mostly positive on him as an artist, but he's always been an act that I would consider quite good without ever being really great. Yeah, his voice, absolutely amazing, but it hasn't always complemented the icy production that tends to dominate a lot of his albums. It doesn't help matters that the dawn of auto-tune and modern R&B really has not aged well, especially from between 2007 and 2010, and that can hurt the longevity of some of his older material if you want to go back to it. On top of that, while I will give him definitely some points for making some pretty damn solid love jams, his sleazier material has never really had the insane wit or creativity that has characterized R. Kelly's work. While Trey Songz does have a lot of charisma, he never really has the soul or boundless presence behind the microphone that has defined Usher. Now, both of this has meant that he tends to get positioned as something of a B-lister, which honestly strikes me as rather unfair because I'd take him over Jason Derulo or Chris Brown any day of the week. I figured Trey Songz' newest record, Trigga, what the hell, it was worth a look. So, what'd I find? Honestly, not a whole lot. It's a Trey Songz R&B record that's alright for the most part, but it's at the same time, it's exactly what you would expect from the guy, and only has brief sparks of creativity instead of something with more ambition and flavor. In other words, fans looking for their standard fix of Trey Songz, they'll like this album, no question. But if you're looking for an R&B record that will just blow your mind beyond Trey Songz' other work, you might leave this record a little bit disappointed. And at this point, anyone who has heard a single Trey Songz album will know exactly what to expect going into this album. The man has a tremendous voice, bar none. And while there are definitely points where I would prefer that he'd opted for a bit more of a soulful approach, I get when it comes to this variety of hookup sex jams, Trey Songz is bringing a certain alpha male braggadocious element that does work in his favor. To be fair, he's also never really overshadowed by his guest stars, and none of them really embarrassed themselves on this album here, which was definitely a plus. The sleaze, it's a natural fit for Juicy J and Ty Dolla $ign, and Nicki Minaj is probably the standout for her verse and the sex-hungry counterbalance to Trey Songz on Touch and Lovin'. And as much as I have never understood the appeal of Justin Bieber nowadays, he's not terrible on the remix of Foreign, and the added show of him actually speaking French kind of fits the vibe of the song. Now, the one guest appearance that I didn't really like was courtesy of Mila J, but that was more courtesy of the song Disrespectful being such an incredibly unappealing song. See, here's where I've always had something of an issue with Trey Songz. The balance between his genuine love songs and his all-out sleaze has always been tilted a little bit further towards the latter than I'd really like, to the points where it actually seems to glorify the drunken hedonism that he indulges in, which can work if Trey Songz actually bothered with morally ambiguous framing or telling more of a story, which he doesn't normally do. But take Disrespectful, a song where both guy and girl are cheating on their respective partners and almost seem to be getting off on rubbing it in those partners' faces. I mean, there's catharsis for its own sake, and then there's just being dicks for the sake of it. Or take Smartphones, which features one of the better melodies and vocal performances where Trey Songz gets caught cheating thanks to his smartphone, and then resolves to lie right to his girlfriend's face to try to win her back, even though he knows it probably won't work. And I'm supposed to sympathize with his emotional plight here, because that's not happening. Take the token moment of introspection on You Ain't Shit, where a girl starts throwing out some pretty uncomfortable questions and valid questions at Trey Songz about the emptiness of his hedonism in his life, over a pretty damn solid piano line, and a pretty good crescendo too. But instead of actually acknowledging that there might be some truth in what she's saying, he jumps straight into counterattack mode, and the entire song just becomes just another sex jam. And you know, I'm not exactly against Trey Songz' material in this vein. After I said, Touchin' and Lovin', it's got a solid balance with Nicki Minaj, and All We Do, it had a certain icy, pure coolness to it that ended up working for me quite well. But when you're 6 albums into your career, and most of your songs have been sex jams in this vein, you don't exactly see a lot of evolution from album to album. Well, okay, that's not exactly fair, as Trey Songz has always worked to stay on top of whatever might be popular in minimalist R&B at the time, and by collaborating with acts like DJ Mustard, Mike Will Made It, and a host of other producers in this vein, he puts together a lot of truly dark and bleak instrumentals, most of which are overloaded with reverb and fuzz, focused on a single echoing keyboard line, and occasionally some interesting percussion. And you know what? If the production had just a little bit more restraint, I'd like it a fair bit more. Take Late Night, which features one of Mike Will Made It's better synth lines and melodies, and speaking as a guy who does not like Mike Will Made It, I can admit that, but then he slathers a fuzz all over that completely killed any feeling of opulence or class that track might have had. Smartphone had a very similar problem with a very thin, high synth at the very top of the mix. It just became intolerable as the song wore on. But the biggest problem that I have with this album is the same problem that I've always had with Trey Songz R&B in this vein, especially with some of the songs with trap influences. It's really hard for me to find this material all that sexy or even all that fun because it's so washed out and dreary. Sure, Trey Songz tries to make up with it for some pretty interesting multi-tracked harmonies, but even on some tracks on this record, he just sounds drowned out in the reverb. It just does not sound flattering, even for him. But then comes the album closer, Change Your Mind, and it's a complete change of pace, featuring primarily a guitar, some rougher percussion, and a generally sunny, upbeat tone in the synths and vocal delivery. And it's like night and day for me. Sure, Trey Songz is singing about much of the same material, but for one song, he actually manages to capture some of that effervescent, upbeat energy in his harmonies, and he makes a genuinely great song. Easily my favorite on this record, if only because this song is still recognizably Trey Songz with the somewhat sleazy undercurrent, but it's loose and it's upbeat and it's fun and just so much more appealing to me. And on that note, it makes me look back at Trigga with that much more exasperation, because Trey Songz is, if he's capable of switching up his production to something like this, he doesn't need to keep returning to the icy keyboards that have dominated album after album of this. He could have done something different and he chose not to, and that bugs me. So look, in the end, putting aside Change Your Mind, it's a typical Trey Songz album, but it's also an album that should have been better than this. Trey Songz has fallen into something of a holding pattern with Trigga, and while I'm quite certain it will please die-hard fans, as this album will inevitably will, it's not one that really engages with me. Half because the sleaze can just get really tiresome and a little bit boring the more he skews towards that balance. Say what you will about the experimentation and the instrumentation on Jason Derulo's tattoos that failed way more often than it succeeded, but at least that experimentation was there. That said, outside of some exasperating lyrics, this record's passable. And Trey Songz is the kind of performer whose charisma can redeem even some frustrating material, which leads me to give it a 6 out of 10. But it's only a recommendation if you're a fan. Otherwise, check out Change Your Mind and just skip the rest of this record. It's not exactly something that you haven't heard before. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or there's any other albums coming out this year that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. So until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.